with compost, whether that's deep mulching with compost or with transferred mulch or green manure, or with hay or straw. We've also talked about interseeding cover crops to provide some cover in between the cash crops, and talked about strategies to reduce tillage depth and frequency. So those are the kinds of topics that we tend to cover, but this group is definitely very open to other ideas that are around that central theme of increasing resilience in a time of climate change. If you're not already on the email listserv, you can join that, and we can share links to that in the chat if that's something that you need to do. If you are interested in leading a discussion at some point, we're going to try and have monthly Zoom meetings moving forward from now. So you'd be welcome to lead a discussion, or if you have a discussion topic that you'd like to raise or you'd like to invite a guest speaker, then that's something that we can organize as well. As the season goes on, hopefully we'll be getting back to the ability to host field days. Those might be virtual yet this year, or hopefully we'll be able to do some in-person field days. So keep your eye on the email so that you don't miss out on any of those. And then something that Claire and Dylan will talk about in a little bit is ways you can get involved through experimenting with your own reduced tillage methods and sharing your observations with the group. So I am going to hand over. I am going to hand over to. Sorry, I don't think Peter has joined the group yet. Have you, Peter? If you're out there, unmute, say hi. Okay, he may not be able to join us today. So I'm actually going to hand over to Jeff at this point in that case. So Jeff farms at Three Sisters Community Farm near Cambellsport, and he is going to talk with us a little bit about his methods to reduce tillage. So, hi Jeff. And I can share your slides if you like.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah. So let's see, I need to stop sharing. Jeff, I'm going to make you a co-host. So then if you want to share your slides, you can do that. Or I have them here if you need me to share them.
All right, if I them.
You should be able to share them now, Jeff.
Okay, can you see them? All right.
No, we cannot see them.
You can't see them.
Nope.
Well. Well, maybe Rue, it would be best if you shared them then, and I could just talk.
Yep, I'll get them up right now. Can you see them now? Great.
Yep. All right. Okay. Yeah, my name's Jeff, and I'm at Three Sisters Farm in Cambellsport, Wisconsin. That's about 45 minutes north of Milwaukee. You can move forward, Rue. Okay. And so yeah, we're about 45 minutes north of Milwaukee, and we do a CSA exclusively now. We do about 235 summer members, and then we're trying a spring share this spring for the first time, and we do kind of a fall winter share also. Until maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we did primarily, I suppose, what we would call sort of normal small scale organic practices. Lots of tillage with a rototiller. And we did use, we've never really used disposable black plastic mulch, but we've always kind of grown our melons and sometimes squash on landscape fabric. So I think we're using that fabric there. This will be our 8th or 9th year using the same fabric. But yeah, if you want to click ahead. Rue. One thing that we've always done is we've been pretty passionate about making compost on the farm on a scale relevant to our size, basically. So for a while we had a skid loader, and I was making these kind of long windrows and using compost tarps to help cure the piles. And then I have this kind of special handy little spreader that holds about 3 yards of compost, and it lets me kind of focus the compost right on our growing beds. So that's been something we've been passionate about from the start, making our own compost on the farm. We never really used like chicken pellets or anything like that. So that's our main fertility source. Okay. About 3 years ago or so, we had been renting some land. It was pretty far from us, so about a half-an-hour drive. And that was just getting to be pretty unsustainable. So about 3 years ago, we kind of had these new opportunities develop for us. We worked with some investors who purchased some farmland on our behalf, and we got to choose the parcel. It was near our homestead, so we own sort of a small 4-acre home site. That's what's at the bottom left there. And then this other parcel is about 29 acres, and it's about 3 miles or so from our house. So it was conventionally farmed, and you can kind of see there were sort of strips on contour of grain of some kind, or corn was being grown there, and then alfalfa in between. Okay. At that time, we kind of switched how we were growing things into 2 sort of different systems. And one we call kind of the intensive system is maybe modeled after like JM4TA style, kind of more garden-like. And Kelly, my wife, manages this system, and that's we grow more kind of delicate crops like lettuce and radishes in that system. We have been using some tarps to kind of prepare areas, and we really haven't done any broad forking in that, though. We are able to prep it with our tractor. You see some beds there prepped on the right. Okay. That's just another picture of the garden, the intensive system. And we have some hoop houses also. That's a 200-foot hoop house. You can click ahead. Inside the hoop house, we grow tomatoes in there also. Okay, so that might be a system that's pretty familiar to people, that kind of level of growing. But so we have this unique opportunity of this other land, 29 acres, part of which, as part of our arrangement with these investors, was that a certain portion would be in pollinator habitat. And so there's about 5 or 6 acres that's being developed into pollinator habitat. On the rest of the site, I sort of took over the crops that you might call extensive. Maybe they're crops that take a little more space, things like squash and potatoes, onions, carrots. We also planted 500 fruit trees on this site to hopefully have some fruit, apples, pears, and plums in the future. They're doing well still. So this was laying out the trees, planting some trees. You can click ahead. So because we had all this land and part of it was in this alfalfa cover, I sort of hashed a plan to grow these extensive crops on this field, but to try to do it in more of these sort of strips and to try to utilize some of the existing cover that I would chop and utilize as mulch. You can click ahead, another one. So you could see I was starting to kind of lay out the field there. This would have been 2019, the spring. Parts of the field did have a cover crop the previous year. This would have been oats and barley, I think. And so it was relatively clean to kind of go into the next year. So I spent a lot of the winter kind of playing with all these ideas of what it might mean to plant something in those alleyways and chop and transfer the mulch onto those growing beds. This is actually, it's sort of the same setup as the intensive system, but it's as if there's a bed kind of missing in between. So all of our equipment works interchangeably for both of those systems. So it's about a 4-foot bed with like a 30-inch bed top. And most crops will grow in 3 rows, about 9 inches apart on top of the bed. That's sort of the spacing and from J.M. Fortier. So I had begun to prep this area and was just imagining beforehand all the things, we grow so many different types of crops and how many different combinations of covers and the different timings. It's the kind of thing that gets me excited, but it can get very complex. So we had this little cedar here that fits in the alleyway, and I was going to use that to plant some cover. I think I was maybe inspired in part by Claire. You know, you had done participated in a study where there was some farmers trying to plant, I think tomatoes it was, into winter-killed sorghum Sudan. And if I remember right, it seemed like maybe that there wasn't quite enough coverage there. But my thought was, what if you could sort of consolidate that, or kind of bring more in to have a more effective sort of mulch. So that was one of the things I was considering here. You can click ahead, Rue. So it's beginning to kind of lay out the beds. Everything sort of worked out very nicely on paper in the winter, but of course, once you get out into actual field conditions, things tend to not work as smoothly as you would have liked. So things are going all right at this point. I was kind of having a little bit of trouble prepping the beds, but I kind of worked them up with the tractor, which can straddle that bed, and had some kind of field cultivators and things, and some discs that I was using to prep that area. And then to make kind of a nicer seed bed where needed, I was using our walk behind tractor that has a 30-inch tiller. So that was some of those beds there. You can see this was in an area where there was some alfalfa growing, I think. Okay. I have quite a few pictures of the field prep, and we can sort of just move through these, and I can talk over them, and I'll let you know if we need to stop. But this was one way. As I said, I was having some difficulty prepping the beds, but here I think I used maybe a middle buster plow to kind of throw some soil out, and then I was bringing it back in to level things out. Also, we may have been planting potatoes here. I'm not sure, but so a little bit later, you can see the alfalfa starting to come on. It was a pretty nice stand of alfalfa, which is why alfalfa, which
Jeff, it appears that you are frozen, which means you probably can't hear me. Oh, there you are. You're back.
Sorry. What was the last thing you heard?
The alfalfa was coming on again.
Okay. Yeah, this is another section where you can see the growth starting there. And my attempts at prepping beds there.
There's a question in the chat asking about the dandelion. Is that in the cover? What is that cover crop with the dandelion? So what is the cover crop is the question.
Yeah, this was more alfalfa, and there was some kind of grass mix in the alfalfa. It was sort of like a hay. And in parts, it was a little more grassy than others. Throughout, there were a ton of dandelions. So you'll see a lot of dandelions. Okay. So yeah, a little bit later, trying to get these beds established. One challenge pretty early on was that I had intended on trying to seed 2 rows into this bed, which is 30 inches wide. But after some initial carrots seeded in there, it became clear that they were too close to the edge, basically, the crops. So I kind of abandoned that and just went to single rows, which you'll see as we click through here more. Okay, yeah, so there's you can see some of the challenges with having a nice planting bed. It was pretty rough. Those are, looks like some broccoli or something there on the left. We also, on the right there, were some peas that we planted in the same sort of zone. Those did pretty well. Okay. Yeah, so you can see some of the crops as I kind of went to this single row. So just one row of crop basically every 7.5 feet was about what it ended up being, which seemed a little silly, but we had the space there. Okay. Okay, so then I started, once the growth was pretty good there, you can see this is probably end of May or so. I started my attempts at trying to chop it, and that was the first thing I was trying to do. I used primarily this sickle bar mower behind our walk behind tractor there. Just fit right in that space nice and kind of laid everything down. I think I had intended on maybe using a flail mower, which we have for behind our tractor, like a 5-foot flail mower, but I think it broke that year, so I didn't have recourse to that. I have a rotary mower, but that was not really the action I was going for. So you can see some of that cover there just sort of laid down with the sickle bar mower. It was very tall, much taller than I really wanted. But this was all at the end of May, when it's probably like the busiest time of the CSA year. So you can maybe kind of see also that I was really having a hard time holding the edges of the beds. Like the growth was really creeping into the bed, and I just was losing a lot of the bed space. So I was trying to devise ways with discs and things to try to sort of hold that bed edge, but I was starting to fail at this point. Okay. So some of that, not a very good picture, but I think those are potatoes in there, actually, which you could see some of what I chopped there and how long it was, really too long. And it started to kind of dry down, and I kind of missed a window to rake it, which to rake it, I was going to use a hay rake like the one pictured here behind the walk behind tractor. And I did try to do that a little bit. You can see the nice windrows. You can see the nice windrows that this person made there. That's not me, but I was trying to go for something like that around these crops. Okay. But yeah, I think because I had kind of missed my window, and it was very long material, I don't really have any pictures of the mulch in the beds either, which it didn't really look very very good. And the implement in the last slide, that was a side delivery hay rake made for behind a walk behind tractor. So yeah, basically that material was not the right size, and there wasn't enough of it really to mulch that bed. So that now less than 30-inch wide bed, that pathway, that was not really enough material. So it was not an adequate mulching job.
Can you remind us, Jeff, I'm sorry, how you just said a 30-inch wide bed, and how many inches were the path that you were harvesting the mulch material from?
Yeah, so I guess you can imagine beds being sort of 48 inches on center
Okay.
in both of these systems, really. But then there would be a bed in between there. So it's probably a little more like 5 feet of material there that could be chopped.
40, it sounds like 48 plus 48 minus 30. So,
yeah.
So 48 plus 18. Thank you.
Yeah. So you can see there's some brassicas there on the left, and you can see how I'm kind of losing the bed, losing the battle to the alfalfa kind of creeping in the side there. And right around that bed edge just became really problematic. Like I wasn't able to cut it there or really weed it there. So it just sort of grew on that bed edge and created a lot of problems. I didn't include a picture, but we have a cultivating tractor, and that was how I was trying to weed this. But there was so much sort of residue in the bed and on the bed edges that it became a nightmare. I have some finger weeders, and they would just, all the residue, all the kind of dead alfalfa would just kind of wind around the finger weeders, and I'd have to get down every 20 feet and take it off. It's kind of a nightmare. Okay. Some things did all right despite the kind of encroaching alfalfa. I think these are beets here. We had a great beet crop and carrots. The potatoes were actually pretty decent. I think those are maybe some potatoes there a little later on. They're kind of starting to wane. But yeah, they got really weedy because I didn't have really a way to weed them at that point very well, and the mulch was not effective. So it created kind of a problem on a large scale. You can see I kind of went all in on this, and I probably should have been a little more conservative. One thing that was good about this trial was this was 2019, so we had some pretty wet weather in the fall, and you could see what happened in the intensive garden there on the right. It was pretty nasty. But on the left, because we had all this cover, basically we could kind of drive out onto the field right next to the crops and harvest. So it was pretty awesome for harvesting. We basically had a drive lane right next to the harvest, and it was wet, but we were able to kind of go out in the field. Had that been a bare field there on the left, it would have been pretty muddy. Those were carrots, I think we were harvesting there. I think because it was so wet, we also had the most slugs I've ever seen in 15 years of farming. It was like tremendous slug damage, and yeah, it was pretty epic slugs. It was probably perfect conditions for them because they had all this alfalfa, all this vegetation. So that was kind of we lost a lot of crops that year. Thankfully, we have this intensive system which Kelly really cranks out the lettuce, and she really carried the CSA that year, which was good because we had a lot of loss in this system. So I got kind of scared, and I decided to kind of work it all up, which maybe I should have done first, but I wanted to kind of utilize that alfalfa that was there. So here's me plowing a lot of the land up. I actually did find that was the first time I had used a plow that's a 2-bottom plow, and I did find that compared to the rototiller that we had used, I sort of learned to farm with a rototiller, and we always just had a rototiller. And I think part of the impulse behind this trial was to get away from the rototiller because to me, the rototiller has only done kind of bad things for the soil on farms that I've been on. So yeah, this was last year planting onions, a nice big bare clean field. I hate to see all that open soil, but I had got kind of scared. So it's not like I worked up the entire field. We still have pathways. I basically kind of spread it out a little bit more. Now we have fields that are about 50 feet wide with living pathways between them. All of these trees are, there's these kind of trees planted throughout the whole site. I also
We'll just give Jeff another minute. I assume he'll be back. He came back last time. Meanwhile, there's some comments in the chat worth reading.
I just to let you know, Peter Seeley is also on.
Oh, and Peter's here. Great.
Oh, Peter's here. Good. So yeah, this was just a week or two ago. Yeah, pretty nice. I did a lot of bed prep, spread a lot of compost in the fall. That's oats and peas have died back. They're kind of ready to go. And some nice rye there on the left. So kind of still thinking about the possibility of what if I could chop that rye there and use it as a mulch on the beds on the right there, maybe. I'm leaving that as a possibility this year. Okay. So yeah, definitely learning experience. Pretty humbling. Maybe you got some ideas from it though. Good to, I learned maybe start a little smaller and slower, not go all in. Yeah, the bed prep, it would have been nice maybe to have plowed beds into the alfalfa the year before and let it kind of mellow and have these beds that were, I have a new respect for alfalfa. It does not die very easily, unless you drive on it, apparently. So I was driving on that area in between, and the alfalfa really petered out by the end of the season. It just didn't like to be driven on. It was also way too much mowing. Like, I spent way too much time mowing in this kind of extensive system and walking around. Like, I lost all kinds of weight because it was just such an immense area to walk around in. It was kind of crazy. Yeah, if the beds aren't really nice, how are you going to weed and transplant? The slugs were definitely a problem, but maybe that was just because it's wet. I don't know. And then it was pretty clear that that was not enough mulch for the area I was trying to mulch. It just wasn't enough. So just some things that I might have done differently. What if I had used like a little hay rake like that? That's kind of a silly little one I found online, but they have bigger ones, or maybe that one would work. I don't know. Maybe a flail mower, chopping that would have been a better call. Yeah, I think one question with these mulch systems is, do you try to transplant into that mulch, or try to move the mulch around the already transplanted crops? I don't know what the answer is to that. So this is kind of more the direction I'm interested in moving now, and I just stole these slides from a presentation by I think this was Jean-Paul Courtien's, who's doing some of this work out in New York. A couple of years ago, he gave this presentation of Jan Hendrik Kropp's system that we heard about at the conference. So yeah, this is sort of maybe the next sort of step that I'm interested in. I would need to get a bigger tractor and a flail chopper like this, and to blow the cover into something like a manure spreader. You can click ahead, Rue. And then they sort of blow it out there and have a pretty uniform coverage. That's a picture of the transplanter they use, which was, we heard at the conference workshop, how that's kind of a pricey thing there. So that's how they've solved the problem of planting into the mulch. Okay, I think there might just be one more slide.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it seemed clear to me that I think Jan Hendrik mentioned that they have an acre of cover crops that is chopped for 1/3 of an acre of vegetables. So that's probably more the ratio, I think, to shoot for. I was kind of trying to go a little more than 1-to-1, and that clearly was not adequate. So yeah, I was just kind of reminded with that kind of ratio of this John Jevons work that I was inspired by when I got into farming, and then it kind of quickly didn't seem very practical. But he and others involved with that project. Can you still hear me all right?
Yep.
You can? Okay. he and others involved with that project had kind of come up with this sort of growing. They were trying to solve the problem of their fertility without animals. So it was something like you need to grow about 60% of your land with compost crops, biomass crops, and make compost out of those crops. So that is something that I think I'm coming around to now, again, is something like that kind of percentage, And so that's the field on the right there. You can maybe get a sense of, it probably would be about 4 acres only for this large parcel that would be in vegetables. Something like that. I mean, it's hard to say because there'll be sort of cover that might be there for a couple of years. There'll be the kind of lowland pollinator habitat that I'm not going to be cutting, or mowing. And we have all the trees. So it's difficult to kind of lay it out like that, but something like maybe 4 acres for the total on that 29 acres would be in vegetables, as maybe a more kind of resilient or sustainable sort of picture. It's what I kind of have in mind. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. That was really interesting. I appreciate it. I'm going to stop screen sharing now. Yeah, I think that touched on a lot of the challenges when you're trying to do this more extensive system. Certainly the bed edge creep is a real problem. And that question of whether you manage the mulch production area simultaneously with trying to grow vegetables within it, I think is really interesting. The pictures of the intensive versus the extensive system in the middle of, right after getting all that rain were certainly, that's a lot of food for thought. I feel like, given the time, we maybe should just open it up at this point for discussion.
Do we want to see if Peter, I think Peter is still here.
Oh, great. Hey, Peter.
Yes, I'm here. I can run through a bunch of things we've done quickly, if you'd like.
Let's see. Does anyone have, just before we do that, Peter, maybe if anyone has questions for Jeff, we could do that, and then we can come back to you. So if anyone's got questions for Jeff, now would be the time to pop them in the chat or speak up.
I have a couple questions. Thanks, Jeff. That was really informative. I was wondering, you mentioned that you spent way too much time mowing, but also that there wasn't enough mulch to adequately suppress the weeds. And I was wondering how many times you mowed versus ended up cutting and then also transferring the residue, just roughly.
Yeah, it's a good question. If I would have had a better way to sort of collect what I was mowing, it seems like that might have been helpful, but I felt needing to mow the bed edges to kind of help the crops that were growing there. So I'd say I tried really at that big growth right at the end of May, beginning of June. I really tried, and that seems relevant for our climate here in Wisconsin anyway, or in the Midwest, to try to harvest that. That's like, whoa, that's where all the growth, all like the amazing growth has happened right then, and then it kind of continues happening, but I really tried with that first one to try to gather that up and use that as mulch. But after that, I was maybe mowing another 2 or 3 times. But over that 10, 15 acres, that was a lot of mowing with a 5-foot brush hog.
I'm just going to share a comment from in the chat about slugs. This is from Nicholas Frillman saying that slugs hate crawling over really nice quality compost. So adding 2 inches of compost on the rows between cover crop rows would reduce the number of slugs that will be crawling onto your vegetable crops. Apparently they don't like crawling over that sort of dry layer of compost when it's dry in the middle of the day. And Liana had a question about using a high biomass crop like sorghum Sudan grass, and whether you think you'd still need more than a 1-to-1 ratio of cover crop land to cropped land.
Yeah, I would love to. I had intended on trying to see that in some of those areas that there was no alfalfa. This past year, I actually did get a really good stand of sorghum Sudan and crotalaria, sun hemp mixed in, and pretty amazing growth. Yes, so and you can chop it a couple times. What was interesting to me about that was that, and I think Jean-Paul Courtiens does this. He lets that grow in really big biomass, and then he leaves it at the end of the year to frost kill, basically, and then now you have all this biomass going into the winter. I think he might no-till drill into it, but my thought was to try to consolidate that the next year and use it as a mulch. That was one of the ideas I had.
Yeah, and one of the things that came out of the workshop we had that Jan Hendrik Kropp was at was the idea of essentially making silage out of green chop cover crop material. And he was talking about if you could get 3 crops off your mulch production area, that if you could get those 3 crops, you might be able to get closer to a 1-to-1 ratio. So I think that's something that would be interesting to try. I've done a lot of mulching of potato crops with straw, usually with rice straw, and just calculating what that would take. That was looking like it would be more of a 1-to-4 ratio. So we have, so it's about 5 o'clock. I want to definitely make sure that we're respectful of everyone's time. Not seeing any more comments in the chat. I wonder, Peter, if you would like to take a few minutes to talk through what you've tried at your farm?
Sure, we could do that. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
We've tried a few things the last 4, 5, 6 years. I always get inspired by it, and still working on how to implement it best. It seems when I look at the folks that are successful out there, like Brian O'Hara, Elizabeth and Paul Kaiser, Paul and Jay Armour, Daniel Mays, they all have good systems, and I think it's really worth looking hard at them and seeing because they've been successful doing it. What we've tried here, we've tried living pathways and mowing, but both the establishment is that we can't keep the weeds from coming up, and the amount of time mowing, I haven't been able to get the living pathways to work. We've tried strip tillage for having a cover crop and then just planting wide crops like winter squash or something into it with moderate success. When the crops vine out and then you have the cover crop, unless you have a super low growing cover crop, it just seems like there's competition there, that they don't get the light as much. So I don't do that anymore. we had about a half an acre. We put solid wood chips on and then transplanted by hand into that for a couple of years. Just the wide row crops again, like zucchini or cucumbers. Only moderately successful. The weeds end up coming through, and it just didn't work out. So we kind of gave up on that one. We have used no-till methods in our greenhouses. We have about an acre under cover for several years now, and that's worked pretty well. I do some wheel hoeing maybe before we plant, but generally we just add compost and plant into it. And so even though all my greenhouses have big enough doors to fit my tractor and my spading machine in there, we've been able to get rid of that. So that's, and occasionally we'll use tarps in there. We've done both the black tarps and the clear tarps for killing stuff and getting the soil ready, you know, without actually having to till it. I'm also inspired by Gabe Brown, you know, looking at a larger acreage, how you can plant cover crops and then no-till into them. We'll be trying some of that this year on land that we'll be planting next year. So we'll just have a whole season of cover crops. We'll start with peas and oats, and I'm just going to rent a no-till drill and then plant a summer big mix of things into that. Hoping that just the Culta Packer will crimp it down. I don't have a roller crimper. If anyone's got one, they're going to rent or lend me. That might be a nice experiment. But yeah, we're on a bigger scale, so I don't really want to do all the handwork for applying mulches. You know, that's the other guys do it on an acre or two. This year we'll also be trying a couple of acres maybe of management system with applying lots of compost, you know, just barely covering the soil totally and then planting into that. We will plan to use our manure spreader going over the beds. We've rigged it up so that it just puts mulch, you know, over one bed at a time, and we'll use our water wheel through it too. So we won't be planting by hand, but we'll have a somewhat mechanized no-till system. We tried that last year and it's only moderately successful. Again, the weeds seem to come through, and then you're in the position of having to either go out with a weed whacker or knock them down by hand, or letting them go, and that's not good. So I'm excited about it. See, we've probably done a few other things too. We do have a source of wood chips, so they're going to be partly what we're doing. We also make a lot of compost, but on these systems we're recovering the soil. You know, it's just an incredible amount of material they have to put out there, and then. But apparently, guys are doing it and doing it year after year, so it's exciting to have that inspiration. But right now, we're still kind of playing with lots of things and don't have any one system except in our greenhouses that works really good.
Peter, what's your feedstock for your composting?
We try to include as many different materials in our compost as possible. We get dairy manure, usually with bedding. With our chicken, there's a poultry operation we get their manure from. A lot of people around us have horses, so we can get horse manure, sometimes with, you know, lots of wood chips in it, sometimes not as much. We do green chop, maybe 10 acres, and can put that in the compost. Let's see, we do, there are times you get, used old bales of straw or hay that can always be part of it you get for cheap. We have a certain amount of veggie waste from the farm. We're also getting some from a former employee that has her own business picking up food scraps from all around Milwaukee and Sheboygan County and Ozaukee County. So we get her contributions to food scraps.
Jeff had a question for you about your transplanting into mulch, whether you're using just a normal water wheel transplanter.
Yeah, we've looked at the transplanters. You know, there are a couple no-till ones that manufacturers have made, and we'll probably be modifying one of ours to try out. They often have some kind of coulter in there or some way of breaking into it. But the water wheel, if your mulch is really finely ground, then the water wheel does okay to get into that. We do use sometimes plastic, sometimes biodegradable plastic, and that can be of help if your fields are not really clear of weeds, and then you can mulch on top of that. We also have a big bale mulcher that we put round bales in and spread that out. So that's another way of applying organic matter and compost. Straw bales to our fields.
Looks like Scott has a question, or Scott's iPad has a question anyway. Scott, do you want to come off mute and ask your question, or did you raise your hand by mistake? Always a possibility.
Sorry, by mistake.
Okay.
I can see a question in the chat asking about winter wheat into which beans is scattered. I guess I'm not entirely sure what the context is for the question.
Am I still unmuted?
You are unmuted.
Yeah, oh yeah, I lived on a small farm in which the woman I was living with, she basically had a winter wheat crop, and then later in the season she scattered beans into it and crimped over the winter wheat. So it's something that I was curious to try. Of course, her farm was very small, so she didn't have any heavy equipment, no tractors or anything like that. So
how did she crimp the wheat in that case?
I think maybe we scythed it. This was like 7 years ago. I think we scythed some of it, and then for some of it I can't remember. It's like a roller crimper, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Can't remember exactly what we used, but I just remember that the beans in particular, because you can plant them later in the season, so it gives the winter crop time to die off. And so that's why I was curious about, peas and oats, trying that, and maybe winter wheat, if anybody's tried to plant into winter wheat.
Does anyone have experience with a system similar to that with any type of summer crop?
I know I've heard of larger scale grain farmers definitely following winter wheat with dry beans, or and they definitely will plant or drill soybeans, and I've heard of dry beans as well, into standing rye or other grain crops, and then crimp. So it's definitely a viable system for those larger seeded legume crops if you can get the timing to work.
Great. There's also a question in the chat from Paul, and I have to admit I have a similar question. So Peter, based on all of the different systems that you've tried, you did say that the greenhouse, the one you're using in your hoop houses, is working well, and you like that one and you would like to keep it. Paul says, what kind of no-till system do you like best, and which system are you excited to try more of? So based on your experience, where are you going? What are you keeping and where are you going?
Yeah, we're trying all of them again. The greenhouse is nice. You don't have to worry about, excessive wind blowing tarps off. So we'll just keep doing that. I guess we use wheel hose in there occasionally, but that we just keep adding compost and planting into it. So that works really good. Just to save my back, I really want to try doing more drilling into cover crops, that are either crimped or winter killed in the spring, so we can avoid, the incredible amounts of material that you need to move to cover the soil completely, to do the same thing that we're doing in the greenhouse in the field. We do have a lot of material, and we're still going to try that, because I think some things I can see what I did wrong, so I can always improve on it. But yeah, on a bigger scale, we have to learn how to grow cover crops and plant into them or transplant into them. That's I think on a bigger scale, that's where the future is.
Great. Thank you, Peter. Do we?
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering if we should stick to our original agenda. I think that if people are happy to stay on until 5:30, there would be time for Claire and Dylan, for the two of you to talk about our options for people tracking their findings from their reduced tillage experiments.
I feel like we can be super brief about that. I don't think it will take much time.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
Did you want to go ahead with that then?
Yeah, I can. I mean,
Wonderful.
Dylan, please chime in or add to where I've missed important details. But I would say I'll put a link in the chat box in just a second when I'm not talking, so I'm not multitasking. But we have a form where any farmer can enter a system or multiple systems that you're trying out at your farm. And then we will kind of keep a record of that and then check in with you later in the season where you can report results. And I say that in a way that maybe sounds more formal than it is, because these forms they were developed in conjunction with farmers. And so the questions are mostly checkboxes where we can get some quick answers there that are easy for you to fill out. And then there's also text boxes where you can enter as much detail as you'd like into that. And if you are not a person who likes to go onto Google Forms and fill these things out, you can also contact Rue, Dylan, or myself, and we will just have a phone conversation or a Zoom call with you, and we will actually do the typing for you as you tell us your story or what you're trying. So again, I'll put the link to the I'm going to try this stuff form in the chat box, and then there's a different link that we'll send you later in the year that will be about what you thought of it. And there it is. Rue just screen shared it. So it is, like I said, it's fairly straightforward, and we're happy to do that with you over the phone. Dylan, what did I miss? Dylan has actually filled this out.
Yeah, I think that about covers it. Maybe we can add a more quickly accessible link in on the front page of the website or something like that as well, in case folks don't find it. But if you're able to, I did drop that in the chat, and so bookmark that form. It takes really less than 5 minutes per system or trial to fill out, and really helps us inform our research and get a handle on what's out there. And I guess I'll drop in the link to the end of season or results forum here as well, just so folks can bookmark that as well if they want to.
And then if people have any questions about those forms or next steps with that or anything, we're happy to answer those. I do feel like I also want to touch on the title of our conversation today, which we've heard a lot of things from Jeff and from Peter, both from their what they've learned at conferences and what their experience has been in the field. And I think it'd be great to open that up and hear whether or not you learned anything from conference season. Was there something that you were excited about trying that you for sure won't try based on what someone said in a conference session? I think it could be really fun to spend this time brainstorming as getting excited about what the next season could hold. I'm just super impressed with both Peter and Jeff, who clearly have had some successes and plenty of things that did not go very well or did not go well enough to try again. And that's super valuable. So but they keep trying. I mean, that's the end point of all of that, right? They're still in it. They're still here.
Yeah, certainly after the workshop with Jan Hendrik Kropp and Dani Gökela and Ellen Drews, I felt a lot of inspiration, and I appreciate the slightly being brought back to earth by having to think about, those living aisles, those cover crops definitely are not just going to sit politely where they are put. So
No, I
yeah.
feel you on that one, Jeff. Oh my goodness. Mine was Dutch white clover, but man, yanking that stuff out. What I tried to do was put mulch in the bed as a way to keep that aisle from encroaching. And then even then, at least the clover that I was using, it would just start spreading right over the landscape fabric. It did not spread as much into marsh hay, but over landscape fabric, it just went right over land. And I don't know, like, since the roots were not right next to the plants, I don't know. I still have to analyze that data and see like how much of an impact or what a difference there was. But yeah, that stuff it's very happy to take over the vegetable bed.
We noticed that if you are using an undercutter on a bed, that you have living aisles next to that, excuse me, that does a good job of edging it. And I imagine that, like a plastic mulch lifter or something else could do a similar thing. So obviously there's some tillage of some sort then at play, but and has other impacts, but some sort of root pruning or edging I think is feasible.
And Dylan, when would you time that? Beginning of the season, before planting, at the end of the season, both, somewhere else?
Well, so like the rotation that was in we did that after garlic. So we would have like a plastic mulched crop with a living aisle, like tomatoes or hemp that has a fairly wide spacing. And so we wanted the living aisle. And then after we pulled up the plastic mulch, it was a nice clean bed. And so we no-tilled the garlic into that, just planted into that, and then used a undercutter to harvest. And it balled up the clover and those kind of stolons that are creeping in, and it would ball up a little bit, but it was no harm done. It rolled off, so it worked.
Living aisles, so many pros and cons.
I'm curious to know how many people in this group are using those kinds of larger scale methods where you'd be using tractor drawn implements, whether a 2-wheel or a 4-wheel tractor, and how many people are maybe using more hand labor, human labor methods.
Both. Paul says hands. Tractor to prep potato bed, but harvest potatoes by hand. Both. Yeah, I feel like vegetable farming is always going to include hands at some scale.
And I think that's a challenge with a lot of these methods that that people are trying to develop, is that you try to do you try to use implements to get these systems set up, but when they don't work out, the amount of hand labor that goes into it can become overwhelming really, really quickly.
So one thing, like some of you mentioned, well, Peter, you said really explicitly, like once you've got that system established and if the weeds are coming in, maybe, I don't know if I see Peter on here anymore. No, okay. So like once you've established that no-till and you don't want to go in and cultivate, or as you said, Jeff, you simply can't get in and cultivate because the aisle is in the way or whatever, the vegetable, it's just not going to work very well. Like I'm wondering about those systems where you then bring in something like a silage tarp or even landscape fabric and kind of cover that bed temporarily or potentially permanently, like if it's a single row crop like you had, Jeff, with those brassicas, you can put in, even if you didn't do it initially, like, I don't know the answer about like, what is the labor trade-off of like struggling through hand weeding that or going in and putting down landscape fabric on either side of that single row crop to just keep those weeds out for the rest of the season. I did that with silage tarps and Brussels sprouts, but I didn't leave it on for the rest of the season. I was picking it up and putting it down. Like, I think I laid it down 2 or 3 times, depending on the system, and it was not fun. But I didn't dill.
Claire, I had to do that last year in a spot that, excuse me, that our rye stand was thin in the rolled rye system, and I stapled landscape fabric over top of it, and it definitely took extra time and annoyed me while I was doing it that I had to do it, but it was absolutely worth it. So it's a good consideration if someone's small enough scale for that to be an option. And I also wanted to mention that, you know, in larger scale row crop systems, there are pretty good high residue cultivators as well that are designed to sort of undercut, you know, more established weeds that are coming through higher residue. So that could be a option for that sort of edging as well.
Great.
Can I ask a question to the group?
Yeah, we can hear you, Paul.
Okay. I'll just want to throw out a harebrained idea and see what people thought. We're using more just straw mulch that we buy and bring in these days, and it's covering large amounts of the field, and it's like, I don't know, it just kind of seems like a shame to till it in, but you know, otherwise you have a lot of residue, and we're planting really intensively and got to use that land really quickly. We also use a lot of landscape fabric, so I thought maybe of designing the rotation in a way that crops that are heavily mulched one year are followed by crops that use landscape fabric the next year. And so the landscape fabric could kind of help the straw break down while covering it, and I could retain that straw and just have it be incorporated over time. But I don't know if that's, you know, going to encourage some slug issues or something, you know, with that straw being under the landscape fabric, or if people could foresee some issues with that.
From my experience this year, stapling the landscape fabric over the rye, I was really surprised how much of it was intact this spring. So, you know, even full season under landscape fabric. So I would say it partly maybe depends on the carbon to nitrogen ratio or sizing of that hay or straw that you're using as the mulch, and how readily it might break down. And I've also heard, but have not had experience with, just a light top dressing of compost underneath the landscape fabric, really promoting more rapid breakdown of the straw or mulch.
Yeah, I'd kind of thought about like, what if I just toss some blood meal on there to help break it down or something like that too. Something cheap and easy to spread.
Paul, that sounds like a great observation, a great little trial to make observations on. I think we'd all be really interested in. So yeah, if you're willing to follow up with me or Claire or Dylan,
absolutely.
Yeah, we'd love to keep tabs on how that goes.
Cool.
Way to bring it around, Rue.
I try.
Jeff, I thought I saw you unmute earlier, maybe with a question or something.
Yeah, I was just going to share thinking about fabric and these smaller beds that I showed how I was trying to make those. It occurred to me that when you have more edges, the more sort of edges you have, the more edges are these very dynamic zones of can be very problematic. Perhaps they can be very generative spaces also. But that was sort of a thought with, well, what if we kind of reduce the edges and just kind of move it all out a little bit more so that we have about 10 beds in the field with edges around those, but not so many edges to manage in between. That was just a thought out. Sorry, Claire, go ahead.
What would that mean about your setup, Jeff? So my memory from looking at your slides is it's like vegetable bed, aisle growing mulch. So are you thinking about like 10 vegetable beds, shoulder to shoulder, and then a separate area where you're harvesting the mulch from? Okay.
I think so. Yeah. Just sort of say, well, this is going to be cultivated space, and there'll be edges around it, but within the zone, there are no edges to keep, because it's all sort of cultivated,
And then if you were to do that, how many years would you leave those 10 beds in cultivated area before you rotate them into some of that area that you've been harvesting mulch from? Because that's going to be the rotation of the till and no till also, right?
Right. Yeah, I think that's where it's really interesting to me, like the balance here. Like maybe you could get 1 year of crops and then for 2 years it's covered, and maybe you're chopping some of it and using it as mulch material. I don't know. Yeah, thinking about it a little more broadly or something that's kind of the direction that I'm moving now, which also I think makes it a little maybe less complex to manage. I don't know. It's a little broader for the kind of scale that we're doing anyway,
I think that's fascinating because it also then fits in with standard equipment on farms, right? Because if you're doing 10 beds in your normal system and the change that you're making is having this big area where you're harvesting cover crops from and bringing it in as mulch, that might perhaps be a little less than a special no-till transplanter and a special no-till direct seeder into mulch that you've crimped or what have you. So I think that's interesting. It's such a long-term project though, because you would want to track the changes in your soil, right, over that time. And so it would mean to see if you're getting those benefits of like concentrating the tillage. I like that idea. We should talk more.
So we're just crossing over 5:30, and so I guess we should probably wrap up at this point. I wanted to mention that a tentative topic we have for our next meeting is to talk about indicators of healthy soil, how to observe them, what they are and how to observe them. So if anyone wants to suggest any other topics, if anyone would like to talk about what they're doing on their farm at our next meeting in April, then please get in touch. We'd love to have you present and learn more about your systems. Jeff, thank you so much for giving us such a great look at all of the different things that you've been trying. Peter is off the call, but I'm really grateful that he was able to share as well. So thank you everyone very much for coming, and stay in touch with the email listserv, and we will see you next time.